Think the Book of Numbers is just ancient math? It's actually a 40-year desert road trip packed with giants, miracles, and a talking donkey. The journey kicks off at Mount Sinai, where Moses conducts a massive census to organize the army. That head count of over 600,000 soldiers is exactly how the book gets its name. At the edge of the Promised Land, 12 spies sneak across the border. They find ridiculously huge grapes, but 10 spies return completely terrified of the local inhabitants. Their exaggerated panic sparks a nationwide rebellion. The consequence is a 40-year detour through the wilderness. They survive by following pillars of fire and eating miraculous bread rained from the sky. When the frustrated crowd complains, a venomous snake epidemic strikes the camp. The cure? Anyone bitten simply looks at a bronze serpent on a pole to survive. Nearing the end, an enemy king hires the pagan prophet Balaam to curse Israel. But Balaam is stopped by his own donkey, who spots an angel and literally talks back. After 4 grueling decades, the rebellious older generation is gone. But a brand new generation of Israelites now stands at the border of Canaan, finally ready to claim their long-awaited inheritance.
All right, let's jump right into this epic explainer of the Book of Numbers. I want you to think of this like a massive 3D animated blockbuster adventure. We are talking about a wild 40-year road trip from the foot of Mount Sinai all the way to the border of the Promised Land. Today, we're going to unpack a journey packed with massive crowds, towering giants, glowing pillars of fire, and yes, even a talking donkey. It's a story that definitely highlights human failure, but more importantly, it shows us a God who is absolutely determined to carry his people across the finish line. Let's get into it. So right off the bat, the sheer scale of this camp is just mind-blowing. The book opens with this highly organized census that counts exactly 603,550 military-aged men, and that's just the men. When you factor in the women, the kids, and the entire tribe of Levi, you are undoubtedly looking at a population numbering in the millions. This massive, monumental counting process right at the starting line is actually exactly why the book got its English title, Numbers. But, the traditional Hebrew title is Bemidbar, which literally translates to in the wilderness. And honestly, that hits the nail on the head so much better. It perfectly sets up the real theme here. We aren't just staring at an ancient spreadsheet. We are watching millions of people trying to survive among harsh, endless desert dunes. It's a totally hostile environment where food and water are incredibly scarce. So this upcoming 40 years of wandering, it's basically the ultimate test of endurance and faith. And they weren't just some chaotic mob wandering around aimlessly. The whole camp was completely dialed in with this strict military-style organization. They were camped in a highly strategic formation surrounding the tabernacle, which was essentially a mobile manufactured mountain where God's presence dwelled. You had Judah leading the vanguard on the east, Dan bringing up the rear guard on the north, and the Levites stationed safely right in the middle to protect the sanctuary. They were literally an army waiting for orders, completely ready to pack up and march the second that glowing pillar of cloud or fire started to move.
That brings us to our inciting incident, Spies and giant grapes.
We suddenly shift from a well-ordered military camp straight into an ancient espionage thriller. The Israelites march up to the very edge of the Promised Land, and Moses sends out 12 spies to scope things out. 40 days later, they come back, and the report is totally split. On one hand, 10 of these spies are absolutely terrified. They are spreading this wild, exaggerated fear about towering giants and impenetrable fortresses. But then, on the other hand, you have Joshua and Caleb. These 2 brave spies haul back actual proof of how amazing the land is, including these comically oversized giant clusters of grapes. They're like, hey, with God on our side, we've got this. But sadly, the panic from the 10 terrified spies spread like wildfire, and the whole camp rebelled.
And actions have consequences. Because the nation completely doubted God's promise and refused to step up, they faced a really severe judgment. The text captures this heartbreaking verdict, basically telling them that they would now wander for a staggering 40 years. The entire adult generation that had seen all the miracles back in Egypt would spend the rest of their lives in the desert. It would be their kids, the next generation, who would eventually cross over and inherit the land.
Which launches us into our next phase, 40 years of wandering. Essentially, the Great Wilderness Montage. If this were a movie, this is where you'd see a fast-paced, cinematic montage showing the grueling fallout of their constant grumbling. Just imagine endless sand dunes as the years blur together. Year 1 starts with such high hopes, led by that magical glowing pillar of fire. Then year 2 hits, the spies rebel, and suddenly we are stuck in this massive loop from year 3 all the way to year 39. Through changing seasons, you see this crazy cycle. God literally provides for them every single day. We're talking water from rocks and manna practically cartoonishly falling from the sky to feed millions. And what do the people do? They complain. They complain about the menu, they complain about Moses, and they just keep talking about how they want to go back to Egypt. Eventually, the pressure of leading this incredibly stubborn crowd gets to everyone. Even their great leader, Moses, has a breaking point. God gives Moses 3 super simple steps to get water for the thirsty camp. Take your rod, assemble the folks together, and speak to the rock. That's it. Moses does the first 2, but then, instead of just speaking to the rock, he totally loses his cool and strikes it twice in a fit of angry frustration. He basically acts like he's the one performing the miracle, completely failing to honor God's holiness in front of everyone. And the fallout was huge. That one outburst actually cost Moses his own entrance into the Promised Land.
Moving on to the next major crisis, the glowing bronze snake, and how they resolved a rather intense epidemic.
So, because of all this nonstop rebellion and complaining about the food and water, the camp suddenly finds itself overrun by these venomous, fiery serpents. It's intense, for sure. But when the people finally cry out in repentance, God provides a remarkably simple, if a bit unconventional, cure. He tells Moses to craft a glowing bronze serpent and stick it on a pole. The instructions were foolproof. If you get bitten, just look at the bronze snake and you are miraculously healed. Boom. It was this profound, real-time lesson right in the dirt of the desert. Having faith and looking to God's provision brings life. Now, we get to my absolute favorite part, Balaam and the donkey. A much-needed moment of comedic relief.
So as the Israelites finally start getting close to the plains of Moab, the local king, Balak, is absolutely terrified of this massive crowd. He hires a famous pagan diviner named Balaam to come put a curse on the camp. But on the way there, things get hilarious. Picture this. Balaam's stubborn, bug-eyed donkey suddenly stops dead in its tracks, crushes Balaam's foot against a wall, and eventually just lays down in the dirt. Why? Because the donkey can clearly see the invisible angel of the Lord standing right there in the road with a drawn sword. Balaam, completely oblivious, loses his mind and starts beating the poor animal. And then God actually opens the donkey's mouth. The beast literally talks back to him, saying, "What have I done to you that deserves your beating me 3 times?" The irony here is just off the charts. You have Balaam, this world-renowned seer, a guy who literally gets paid big money to see into the spiritual realm, and he is completely blind to God's angels standing inches from his face. He gets totally outsmarted by his own pack animal. And the best part? When Balaam finally shows up and opens his mouth to curse Israel, God basically hijacks his vocal cords. Every single time, Balaam is forced to utter these beautiful, sweeping blessings over Israel instead of the curses he was hired to say. Absolutely brilliant. And that brings us to the journey's final stop, the plains of Moab. After 40 years of literal chaos, the massive crowds, the complaining, the rebellion, and yet some incredible spiritual growth, this epic road trip finally winds down. A brand new generation of Israelites is now standing on the high plains, looking out across the Jordan River. And despite the staggering unbelief of their parents, and despite all the epic fails we've just talked about, the core takeaway is pretty clear. God's enduring grace carried them across the finish line. It shows that no matter how much we might stumble along the way, His promises are always true. So to wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this thought. This book isn't just a bunch of ancient history. It's a mirror. When you find yourself facing giant obstacles, when you're wandering in your own personal wilderness, what's your move? Will you grumble, give in to that exaggerated fear and try to back out? Or will you have the patience and the faith to just trust the journey? Remember, the God who provides the manna is the exact same God who will get you to your promised land. Let that sink in this week. Keep learning, keep trusting, and I will catch you in the next explainer. More than a year after escaping Egypt, the Israelites are camped at the base of Mount Sinai. They have their laws, they have their covenant, and they are finally preparing to march toward the land of Canaan. We know the book detailing this journey as Numbers, a Greek title referring to the massive population counts taken in its chapters. But the original Hebrew title is Bamidbar, which translates to in the wilderness. This chart visualizes the first Great Census. Moses counts the men of military age, the tally rapidly hitting 603,550 soldiers. But these numbers hide the people's internal state. Despite carrying weapons, many still feel like slaves, fragile, disorganized, and prone to panic. A massive army and physical freedom mean very little without the faith required to actually step into the Promised Land. The consequences of that fear surface immediately when the Israelites arrive at Canaan's southern border. Moses dispatches 12 spies to reconnoiter the territory. 40 days later, the spies return with a report that incites widespread panic. They describe fortified cities and people so large the Israelites felt like grasshoppers in comparison. The congregation rebels, even proposing they appoint a new leader to take them back to Egypt. This timeline shows God's response to their refusal to enter the land. Because this generation chose fear over the promise, they are barred from the goal. They are condemned to wander the desert for 40 years, exactly 1 year for every day the spies scouted the land, until every adult from that first census has died. This failure turned a short journey into a multi-decade loop through the desert. The conditions of that journey were brutal. Deep in the desolate wilderness of Zin, the water supply completely dries up. Thirsty and desperate, the people turn their anger toward Moses, asking why they were brought into a wasteland just to die. God tells Moses to assemble the people and speak to a rock to bring forth water. But Moses, exhausted by years of constant rebellion, reacts in anger. He berates the crowd and strikes the rock twice with his staff. Water erupts, but the command was broken. The consequence for this outburst is specific. Because he acted out of his own frustration rather than following instructions, Moses is told he will not be the one to lead the people into the land. The patterns of the first generation continue. Later, when the people grumble yet again about the lack of food and water, venomous snakes plague the camp, leading to many deaths. When the people admit their sin, God provides a remedy, a bronze serpent mounted on a pole. Anyone bitten by a snake simply has to look at the figure to be healed, requiring a small but essential act of faith. These trials show the constant push for rebellion wore down even the most patient leaders. After years of mediating for a people who refused to trust, Moses reached a breaking point, reacting with his own anger rather than the quiet obedience God required. Decades later, the survivors reached the plains of Moab. Their arrival terrifies the local king, Balak, who hires a famous diviner named Balaam to place a curse on the Israelite camp. As the diviner travels to meet the king, his donkey abruptly stops, refusing to move because it sees an angel with a drawn sword. Balaam, the supposed seer, can't see the angel at all. He beats the animal until it miraculously speaks to him, revealing that the visionary was the only one on the road who was blind to the truth. When Balaam finally stands on the cliffs overlooking the Israelites, he finds he cannot curse them. Every time he opens his mouth, God forces him to deliver blessings instead. In the valley below, the Israelites are unaware and often ungrateful. Yet on the mountains above, God is actively defending them from threats they don't even know exist. As this comparative chart illustrates, the 40-year sentence is now complete. The statistics of the old generation wipe away, replaced by the results of a second census. The adults who left Egypt are gone, replaced by a younger generation. This new generation is camped beside the Jordan River. They are finally ready to cross the water and claim the promise their parents were too afraid to take. The Book of Numbers is more than just a ledger. It is a record of the death of one era and the deliberate forging of a new, faithful generation.